First off, one of the things that you're most famous for is your book, and that has sort of become a comment that people know, The End of History. And I did hear you on the show. You said that sort of idea is often misunderstood. So can you explain what you meant by the end of history and how it's been misunderstood?
Well, first of all, the word end in the end of history does not mean the termination or the stopping. It's end in the sense of goal or direction. And it's an idea that the Marxists had, that history was directional and it would end in a communist utopia. And my argument that I started making in the late 1980s was it didn't look like we were going to get to this utopia, that to the extent that history had an end or a direction, it looked like it was heading towards liberal democracy and a market economy. And that's really the meaning of the end of history. I mean, where is it pointing, and is there another point beyond that we're going to aspire to? And I just didn't see one.
And how has it been misunderstood or misapplied?
Well, I think every time something happens in the world, September 11th or trouble in the Balkans, people say, oh, well, look, things are still going on, things are still happening. How can you say that history is over? And of course, I didn't say history was over. I said, what's the direction of our political development, and what direction is it pointing? Is it pointing towards democracy, or is the world going to evolve into an Islamist theocracy? And I think it's still the case that I bet on democracy.
One thing I wanted to ask you, I'm always having discussions with my father-in-law, who's a kind of a hardcore conservative, and he always lumps democracy and capitalism together. He's always talking about, well, that's how capitalism and democracy will evolve. And those two concepts are inextricably linked in his mind. And I want to know if you feel that really is the case, and if so, how do we account for China?
Well, I think, as the case of China suggests, that they're not linked. You can have authoritarian capitalism, and in fact a lot of countries in Asia, not just China, but Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, even Japan itself, in the early days evolved as non-democratic states, and you can actually do that pretty well as long as you've got a framework of property rights and a government that maintains stability and order. The real question, I think, down the road is, if you have an authoritarian society that develops very rapidly and people get rich and you develop a middle class and better education, isn't there going to be pressure to become a democracy? And I think that's one of the issues in China's future, that as they get richer, are people going to be happy with an authoritarian government that treats them very paternalistically, or are they going to want to participate more in making choices for themselves?
Do you think there has been a conflation of those two concepts, democracy and free market capitalism, within the conservative movement?
Well, I think that a lot of conservatives are actually more interested in the capitalism part than in the democracy part, because a lot of times what happens if you have democratic political systems is people want things like redistribution, or they want social protections or social programs, and there's a tension there, because a lot of conservatives, I think, are really focused on economic growth and less on the consequences for social equality and things of that sort. So I think actually in their case it's the capitalism that's the center of the agenda.